everyone at home. Welcome to a new episode of Noche Duermas. Sorry for my Spanish. Today, we will take a trip to the past, revisiting the 70s and the punk communities. We will discover its beginnings, its history, and how it affected our youth vision of life. We will also visit today punk culture and how they feel represented. Stay with us.
Before punk became a subculture, it was first a musical genre. Punk, also called punk rock, is an aggressive form of rock music that is easily identified by their fast tempo and hardcore sounding music. Emerging around the 60s but becoming a major culture phenomenon in the mid-70s, it's often characterized by its politicization and vital energy beneath a sarcastic, hostile facade. Punk spread as an ideology and an aesthetic approach, becoming an archetype of teen rebellion and alienation. Punk presented itself primarily as a youth culture. Its principal means of expression was through style, popular music, and the music media. Its main adherents were aged in their teens and early 20s. It drew from and critiqued previous forms of popular youth culture and the cultural industry of which it was part. To an extent, therefore, punk can be viewed as another in the line of youth subcultures that stretched back at least to the 1950s. Yet, punk emerged in a distinct socio-economic context. If post-war youth cultures had developed in tandem with economic growth, then punk flowered in a period of economic downturn. Consequently, punk may be seen less as a culture of aspiration and more as a culture of revolt. One of its defining characteristics was its explicit challenge to prevailing cultural and social mores. Punk is generally regarded as a defining moment in British cultural history. In its rhetoric and style, punk appeared to encapsulate the socio-economic and political climate of the late 1970s. It seemed to form a distinct youth culture that in turn provoked a media-driven moral panic and prompt notable cultural change. Most significantly, punk appeared to politicize cultural practice at a significant juncture in British history. Its lyrics and iconography commented on society and politics. Its approach challenged the prevailing orthodoxies of the music industry. It questioned social and political hierarchies and notions of personal identity. In the 60s, music had fallen into a focus on supergroups like the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, making it harder for other smaller groups to have their own musical voices heard. However, the high unemployment rates of the 70s and the socio-political world of the time meant that we ended up with a lot of teenagers with plenty to say and even more free time. The history of punk rock and the origins of where this music originally began are widely debated. The reason for this is that everyone seems to have a different definition of what punk bands should look and sound like. Despite this, we've seen countless punk festivals appearing throughout the years to cater to those with various tastes in the punk world. Though there's plenty of different definitions out there for what a punk band should be, the ethos of the genre has always been described by its founders as a concept of freedom and power. Using basic chords and short arrangements in combination with politically charged lyrics, punk music was an outlet for the underpaid and underappreciated. Punk rock lyrics are typically frank and confrontational. Compared to the lyrics of other popular music genres, they frequently comment on social and political issues. Trend-setting songs such as The Clash's Career Opportunities and Chelsea's Right to Work deal with unemployment and the grim realities of urban life. Especially in early British punk, a central goal was to outrage and shock the mainstream. The Sex Pistols' Anarchy in the UK and God Save the Queen openly disparaged the British political system and social mores. The controversial content of punk lyrics led to some punk records being banned by radio stations and refused shelf space in major chain stores.
The 70s punk movement started as an evolution in high street fashion, hairstyles, and makeup. Everywhere punk culture went, it left a mark behind. Punk styles began as a reaction against capitalism, conformity, and institutions. Aesthetically, punk fashion came to contrast the relaxed hippie movement and the sparkly shine of disco. While America took a little longer to adapt this style, England found its very own version of punk fast, appropriating boots, skinny jeans, and dark clothes. The origin of the fashion of this movement is usually related to Vivienne Westwood, a school teacher who became into fashion design by opening her boutique called Sex with her boyfriend, Malcolm McLaren. Her sense of punk became the aesthetic of the era, with ripped t-shirts, erotic images, and provocative, shocking clothing. Punk always has been seen as an exclusive style, not as a commercial concept. It is not something that you can buy from a store. Punk hairstyles, from the mohawk to the brightly colored spikes of the 70s, wasn't something that you could pick out from a hair catalog. Even punk makeup, with its bright colors, dark lines, and shades, was something unique to everyone who wore it. In a sense, punk was, and is nowadays, a chameleon that changed to suit the needs of anyone who embraced it. There is no single definition, yet we do have ideas of images that are essentially punk. No matter what do you think you know about the history of punk, there will always be pictures of peers, shaven men with ripped shirts and boots that are classified as punk. Even when it tried to clean the style of some of its political messages, 70s punk fashion was always political in nature, and that could never be removed.
Punk emergence, the UK was in a time of open conflict and discomfort. Leaders of commercial strike were being sent to prison, and teenagers were starting street wars against each other, sometimes killing friends in the process. Yes, there was an overwhelming rise against the police, and women were still battling for equal rights as the working class struggled to have their voices heard. When it comes to punk and politics, it's easy to forget the anger and pain that caused the punk movement to come to life in the first place. While punk fashion and punk makeup might be a way for people to stand out today, it was a necessity for groups who felt they couldn't be heard without doing something drastic. These original punks embraced the extreme in their own personal brands because they were standing for something, representing something raw and real. For those who never truly embraced the movement, the 70s punk was nothing more than an angry and frustrated teenager. While that's part of this movement identity, a closer look at the key players in punk throughout the years reveal a collection of ethnic minorities, political radicals, and overlooked citizens, the oppressed and outsiders of society. Since its inception, punk and politics have gone hand in hand, as the punk and disorderly icons of the day began to get older, and punk evolved over the years. It is split up into different subgenres with different ideology. Hardcore punk remain in one corner, fighting against injustice with anger and violence, while other, less aggressive punks embraced the punk pop genre to reach a wider audience.
Even if punk never did emerge as a full mainstream movement, we still remember it today. The reason that punk culture today is still a pervasive force is that the foundation of punk exists in doing something different. When people rise up against the status quo, they stand out, and that's something that's hard to forget. Punk, more than a musical genre, is this a social movement in which disenchantment and rebellion converge, above all, for a sector of the young and unsatisfied population. Therefore, it is always in force. You can always get hold of it. There is always someone who wants to protest, and many times the ideal is to do it through a song to show anger, non-conformity. Keeping a promise. It's all about authenticity. Look at the Sex Pistols, for instance. Though this band's career may have been relatively short, they held on to a cult following for decades. This is loyalty that you can buy, and it comes from the fact that the Sex Pistols were raw, authentic, and real. 70s punk, however you look at it, was grounded in authenticity. That realness translates into real devotion for fans. It makes sense to connect emotionally with people on an authentic, transparent level. Standing for something. Despite what some people believe, punk culture wasn't just about being loud and boisterous for the sake of it. Boy punk, rock, and the people behind punk were undoubtedly in it to have some fun. There was a reason for this movement too. The people who established punk, like Vivian Westwood and The Clutch, were making a statement and standing for something unique. As mentioned, much of the inspiration for punk movements comes from the socio-political issues of the day. However, you don't have to be political all the time to be authentically punk. Any person who stands for something, shows their values, and makes a difference, embrace the punk concept in their life. You don't have to be perfect. The beauty of punk rock is that it is pure, raw emotion, and exposes a nerve that doesn't need to be slick and polished to get its point across. I mean, Sid Vicious was probably the world's worst bassist, but did that stop the Sex Pistols from making history? Hell no. All punk act is that you give it your all, and if you make a mistake, then even better. At the end of the day, punk is so much more than a music genre or a style of clothing.
The influence of punk goes beyond any predefined guidelines. Instead, it comes to represent a range of cultural ideologies and concepts.
While some people clearly take punk the wrong way and use it as an excuse for their anger and rage, others embrace the hope and passion in punk to drive them toward their goals.
From the primal surge of a new music scene, punk has emerged as a vein that cuts through everything in the modern world, from politics to art and culture. It affects people throughout the world, changing the way we think and the way we feel.
The very word punk has come to mean something associated with rebellion and subversion in its many different forms. At this point, it seems that we'll never find another muscle, genre or ethos with the same pervasive nature of punk.
As a conclusion, we can see that punk, more than just a style, It's an expression of dissatisfaction with those things in society that we want to change. But unlike other trends, punk invites you to empower yourself with this feeling and mobilize yourself to make what you don't like different. Every person who feels punk in their veins has the power, the responsibility, and the right to be able to manifest themselves against those parameters that capitalist society impose on us. Enough with the conformism and indolence. Do you want to change what surrounds you? Punk says, now it's the time.